Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session of Illuminating Insights. I'm joined today by Cliff Lee. Cliff is an amazing Agilist, and he is joining us today. He is an Agile product discovery, development, and deployment veteran with 36 years of broad sector experience in engineered materials, insurance, consumer electronics, food, petrochemicals, pharma, and retail industry experience. He has held product management and supply chain leadership positions in Fortune 100 World and brings a wealth of business transformation insights, methodologies, and know-how to his clients to help them in their strategy deployment journeys. He enjoys creating a positive feedback culture with his clients and unleashing the power of team creativity to solve customer problems through innovative product discovery methods. He is a trusted advisor of top executives and a change management expert. He has a reputation for delivering financial results far above expectations while improving internal processes through simplicity, transparency, and durability. Cliff, we're so excited to have you here today.
It's great to be here, Trisha, and thank you very much for inviting me.
And I'm excited about our topic today because it's one that is not only near and dear to my heart because I've been using outcome-based planning for about 14 or 15 years, but it's one that so many people are talking about today. And you are someone that has been coaching organizations in this for a long time. So I'm excited to have your expertise here to talk to our listeners about it.
It's near and dear to my heart as well. Outcome planning tends to be a gap between the C-level and the middle management. This is oftentimes where I've found in both my industry experience and also in my consulting experience that there's a dilution of strategy and the execution of it. And so you get mixed messages the further down in the organization you get, and that causes a lot of angst. Let's be clear about that. So outcome planning is just to talk around it is one thing where leaders get a chance to articulate a vision for the future, whether that be short-term or long-term, that can not only excite their employee base, excite clients, stakeholders, shareholders, but also clearly and concisely define what they want. And that's where the rub is. That's where I think leaders have a hard time is in being able to provide that kind of clarity.
I would agree. I think that's one of the problems that we hear a lot of customers really trying to solve, a lot of companies trying to solve. How do you really talk about taking and translating that short and long-term strategy into something that's tangible that can someone can get their arms around and talk about how do we do this?
Well, there's a lot to unpack on that one, but let's start with just talking about the what typically constitutes a business strategy. There are short and long range components of that. And that can be where a business can fall down. They might be listing just simply goals and objectives, which is not a strategy. So you have to get beyond that and know clearly what choices, specific choices that you're making in order to achieve specific objectives. Like I say, there are short and long range ones. The long range ones are a business's North Stars. And so in order to put your oar in the water and get to there, you've got to identify the shorter range ones that are stepwise, you can make tangible progress towards. And so when you do that, you're not only getting really good clarity, but you're also on a year by year basis, you're defining these outcomes that are achievable by an organization, and that an organization then can, once they start knocking out accomplishments in that space, they tend to get a lot more confidence that they can actually get to where they want to go. And it makes that North Star a lot more achievable. That's one of the things that I've seen is that there's a psychological barrier that comes between leadership and the whole organization where you can imagine some really great things. But if you're not going to articulate specific outcomes on how an organization is going to get there, that's where an organization reacts to the vision with a bit of disbelief. And so we got to get beyond that. And so that's where the short-term outcomes that have to be defined and in order to be able to achieve what you're talking about here. That's
That
part of
really
it. There's a lot more to it. Maybe
That really makes a lot of sense. And how do we actually take that big, amazing, hairy goal, that BHAG, and how do we break that down into, those incremental things to get us there? How do we then measure that success along the way? Because we've got a we've got this North Star, so then we get these short term, maybe 1 year outcomes, but then how do we measure our success? How do we know that we're actually going to achieve that outcome?
Yeah, that's another place where organizations can get hung up. And it's not simply about monitoring standard KPIs and trying to measure progress against them. It's really about how you're going to get from A to B. And those B destinations are going to change. They're changing faster than ever before. How we journey matters more than it ever did. And so that the measurements have to be about the journey, not about the KPIs more often than not. KPIs, as we know, are run the shop, keep the lights on, that kind of stuff. We need to have measurements that pertain to the transformation. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the journey. If we think about how outcome planning feeds into that, outcome planning feeds OKR development. It provides the subject matter that an OKR can get built around. And OKRs, of course, when you start achieving specific, say, 1 year objectives, right? We all have 1 year OKRs, or at least I hope that organizations practicing this have 1 year OKRs. The KRs that are inside that need to have specific metrics assigned to that part of the journey. This is the stepwise progress that I mentioned before. Those are not KPIs. And so one of the toughest things that an organization, in my experience, has in front of them when trying to put the meat on the bone on how we're going to get the transformation that we need in order to achieve a 3 to 5 year objective is in identifying the specific metrics, and specifically, are these realistic? Are they SMART? I think we all know that acronym. And so if they are, that's probably one of the key tests that you have to be able to specifically measure against a key result. And one of the other places where organizations will fall down is they might come up with a great OKR. The KRs are in place, the metrics are there, and then 6 months later, okay, how are we doing against it? We're not measuring that just yet. So organizations can fall down on actually not having the discipline to collect the data that they set about doing in the first place. And this is part of the execution aspect of it. And it's the discipline, I think, of having a really good foundation of an enterprise business strategy team that understands this and can put the governance and discipline in place that enables the metrics to be collected in the right way and progress to be measured. There's an ancillary comment, if I might follow up on that, Trisha.
Yes.
Data that gets collected and shows that a specific key result that gets identified in an outcome, or excuse me, in an OKR, if it shows that it's going nowhere, it's not really valuable, what do we do with that? I think the answer is obvious, right? We need the ability to, on a periodic basis, preferably on a quarterly basis, to cancel or change what we're going after in order to make our efforts even more valuable. And so this is the value of measuring success, is if we do it this way, we're going to get to where we want to go that much faster and more accurately.
And I think what you're talking about is something that's really key. And it's something that, it took me a long time to really understand, and I still see a lot of people struggling with this when we have conversations, is that key results really need to be numeric in nature. It can't be
Quantitative.
we built a manual. Well, what does building a manual actually get you? What does documentation get you? So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think it's a really important point.
Okay, I think so there's a bunch of stuff here that I'd love to talk about. Let me just try and summarize. There is the difference, and I think this is very well known in terms of the quality of the data that we need. There's the quantitative versus the qualitative type of data that we are looking for. We want the quantitative data. And from a statistics standpoint, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't really understand. because then you start delving into some math. And if you're not a math major or a stat major and you haven't, or like you're not Six Sigma and all this stuff, you can start to intimidate you. Quantitative data is generally continuous data. And it makes your statistics really accurate, and you can extrapolate much more easily when you use quantitative data. If you use qualitative data, it's typically going to be subjective. And if it's not subjective, it's like I have quantitative data that's a yes or no or something like that. It's discontinuous. And when you use discontinuous data, it makes the math much more difficult and inaccurate. And that's one of the basic reasons why we want to have the quantitative data versus qualitative. Okay, there's something else. Any good businessman is going to, or business person, is going to make a bunch of assumptions with regard to why we want to have a certain outcome. And those assumptions are based on a hypothesis of how shareholders, customers, stakeholders, the market, business competitors, et cetera, are behaving and going to behave over a period of time. The longer the period of time goes, the less accurate that assumption is going to be. And when you are going to create a hypothesis into the future on why a certain outcome is going to be valuable to a constituency, your hypothesis, if it is only going to generate qualitative data, probably not a good hypothesis. The hypothesis has to generate quantitative data in order to be a good hypothesis and something that you can validate. It's not like I'm going to make a bunch of people really happy here in a couple of years when I do this. That's a very bad hypothesis to begin with, but it is a hypothesis. So this actually builds a discipline when you start to look at the accuracy of your data and how good you can get it from a quantitative standpoint. It builds a discipline all the way up the ladder of thinking, all the way up to challenging your hardest assumptions here on why you're doing something and why you're assuming something is valuable. So that's a great question, Trisha, and that's one I didn't expect. I'm glad I could answer that, hopefully, in this case.
I figured you've been doing this for a long time, Cliff, so I didn't think I'd catch you too far off guard on that one. So,
Well, I didn't want to come up with a big math question or math answer here for everybody, but but that's the
but it
case.
is one,
That's the way it is.
yeah, it is one that I see people struggle with though, because especially when we're starting with creating outcomes, it's really, I think, easier. Our mind goes to, I've done the documentation, or we've created the website, or we've done this thing. So that should be a key result. And so it's really getting down to the meat of, well, what does that thing that you've done produce for you? What is the value you're wanting to get out of it?
Yes,
So
I totally agree. Let
it's
me throw a bit of, there's another little bit of math. This is all about OKR building and all that stuff, but it does factor into outcome planning. The assumptions should always factor in or at least imply a function, a mathematical function, f of x equals y. In other words, you've got major levers you want to push. If you push those levers, you're going to achieve a certain outcome, which is y, the y, okay? And you better be darn sure that you're pushing the right levers here, the right x's. And this is exactly what you were just referring to. You want to make sure that you're measuring the right things, that you're working on the most impactful work that gets you to your outcome. And this can be sometimes very hard to do. This is why another reason why getting quantitative is really important.
another thing that I see organizations struggle with is we do a great job of creating outcomes, even, creating those right key results so that we're measuring the right things. But then it's how are we communicating it? And then how are we aligning across our organization to make sure everybody knows what it is that we're trying to achieve and why? How do you help your customers do that? Are there specific tools or different ways that they can go about that really make this conversation about our outcomes and what it is that we're trying to achieve really be impactful inside of organizations?
Yeah, let's talk about, first of all, what lies behind ineffective communication,
Mm,
and what might be some of the major causes. You just made me think of one. or some here, and I think I'm going to rack it up in to the fact that many companies that we work with are very large, which means that they've been around a while, or at least you might have a big business that was part of two businesses that just got merged together, but those two businesses have been around a long time. And you have an organization then that long ago achieved an original vision that has worked for them. That's why they got so big in the first place. And so in other words, they're set in their ways. And large organizations have to, by their nature, become fairly bureaucratic. They have many tiers of reporting within them. And what you ultimately have is a structure where communication is cascaded. And because it has to be vetted by, say, middle management or approved by HR, approved by legal, and you have all these approvals and the cascades, and all the next thing you know, you've got a dozen messages, and it's not very effective. The other issue is that kind of size of business can be very conservative in their ways. So communication is often very conservatively crafted, and legal hone it down to say only the minimum. And so a lot of what you want to say in a communication that is business wide can be diluted. What that does is that it may fail to clearly articulate the vision, the goals, the expectations. It may fail to achieve a basic objective of communication here, which is that everybody needs to understand what their role is and how their work contributes to a bigger picture. So effective communication in large organizations is a huge opportunity. Let's face it, right? We've got so many different ways to communicate, and some of those ways are not very good. A large mass distributed email communication is subject to so many misinterpretations. I think we may have all experienced that.
Yeah.
And so what has to happen are remedial meetings where middle managers get their staff together, their groups together, and they talk about the communication. And then it's up to that manager to interpret the communication. So it's really very hard to have effective communication in these types of cultures. And these types of cultures are very common. It's more effective to have a town hall meeting where the leader gets out in front of everybody and talks about what they want to do, why, and then has a large Q&A session. If we've ever participated in that, we'll know that some of the most effective leaders that I think we can probably remember, just thinking about this discussion, people listening to this will think, yeah, I know this guy, I remember this person. And I remember Ellen over here, she did a great job with her town halls. That's one of the best ways to do it. But like I say, organizations tend to fall down in this respect. So that's another opportunity.
And I think one of the things that we sometimes need to make sure is that we have some of those basics of communication already established, that there's already that transparency and trust and positive feedback culture already set up inside of the organization so that it's not considered to be the flavor of the month. This is going to blow over. We're going to go back to the way things have always been. So, how do you actually set some of those things up to make sure that outcome-based planning is successful inside of an organization?
Okay, so that is a great dimension here to talk about. And this is a point of frustration for a lot of teams in many businesses, which is there might be a lack of empowerment. There could be a lack of feeling comfortable about voicing opinions and concerns, and that, say, their feedback is probably not listened to and acted upon in a manner that gives people a confidence that leadership is fully engaged. The people who are charged with, say, the tactical day-to-day execution here that makes a business what it is. And there really are some key ingredients to being able to change that whole chemistry here. So the leaders have to actively listen and show that they're actively listening. And they can do that by holding, say, and I'll just take the town hall forum. There are other forums, right? There's actually one-on-one, say leader to group session, say we've got CEOs coming to have a lunch with us today and talk about any issues that you want to talk about. And by the way, it's he or she wants to hear that because they want to understand exactly how you're feeling. And so it's really important that happens. Now, I have seen that, and it's been very healthy. It allows people to say, you know what, we've got our CEO is listening to me. And we saw an email that followed up like a week later that addressed my concern or the group's concern. That builds confidence and trust. And that's a key. The other thing about confidence and trust is that there has to be transparency in the decision making. Leaders, I have certainly seen leaders say one thing and then do something else, or not say paint the whole picture that people need to know. That's lack of transparency. And then an action's taken, and you're like, why did they do that? And so that doesn't breed the kind of confidence and trust that you have in leadership, and you feel like they have, say, an ulterior motive. It's if we need to downsize an organization by 20% and there's a specific why, there are ways to do that properly. If we need to say we have a very important outcome that leaders have identified and say the organization may have some concern about that outcome, then there are tools here in the effective communication and the active listening that leaders can do, the transparency and trust space that can be used to allow something which is very important, allow a positive feedback culture. So leaders are responsible for having that type of culture. If they can't develop it, then they risk employees being actively disengaged. That's a nice way of saying sabotage. It's one thing to be actively engaged. That's exactly where you want an organization to be. But if you can't create positive feedback culture, you really do run the risk of people being actively disengaged, which is really dangerous for an organization.
Awesome. Well, Cliff, I have really enjoyed our conversation today. You've got such great knowledge to share with everyone. Any final thoughts for our listeners before I let you go today?
I think what I'd like to say is that many times I spoke to this a little bit before, which is challenging your assumptions. It's dangerous, and leaders can be very susceptible to not challenge their assumptions, to have such confidence that they know what's right, that they can get themselves in a bad place, like the new Coke, or say the Amazon, what was it, the Fire Phone or whatever it was. Microsoft tried to do a competitor to iPhone. There are so many examples in industry of products being put out there that were based on an unchallenged leader's assumption, where they didn't do enough, say, collaboration with their organizations, collaboration with their product teams to vet an idea appropriately and get to a place where, okay, I want this outcome. All right, but it's not with this phone you had mentioned. It's with a different technology. And by the way, here's what we got. We got something better than what you originally imagined. That's the kind of collaboration that we're talking about here. And it is a great way to reduce risk in an organization. Leaders don't realize, I think, how much risk they inject in an organization by assuming that they're right.
Mm, that is a that is definitely food for thought for all of us. So, Cliff, thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation and I look forward to having you back.
Likewise, Trisha.
Thank you all.
Yep.
Thank you all for being a part of this episode of Illuminating Insights. Until we see you again.